Tolu adjusted her glasses, her heart steady as she prepared her defense for the most high-profile case of her career. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with whispers. She was used to the pressure after all. She was Lagos' top criminal lawyer, known for taking impossible cases and winning. "Call the first witness," the judge's deep voice boomed, silencing the room. The prosecutor stood, holding up a large photograph. "Your Honor, this is the victim, Kayode Adewale. He was brutally murdered 6 months ago. The accused was found at the crime scene, covered in blood." The photograph was passed to Tolu, and she took it with a calm, professional air. But the moment her eyes fell on the picture, the ground beneath her seemed to crumble. It was him, the boy with the mischievous smile and a chipped tooth. The boy who had taught her how to climb trees and fight bullies. The boy who had vanished without a trace 20 years ago. Her brother. "No, it can't be," Tolu whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands trembled as she clutched the photograph, her vision blurring. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from the image. "Tolu," her assistant whispered, nudging her arm. She snapped out of it, forcing herself to focus. But inside, her mind was racing. If this was truly her brother, then everything she believed about his disappearance was a lie. The accused, a frail young man in his 20s, sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the ground. Tolu glanced at him, her thoughts in turmoil. Why would this man kill her brother? Who was he? "Your Honor," Tolu said, standing up, her voice shaky but firm. "The defense requests a short recess." The judge frowned but agreed. As Tolu walked out of the courtroom, her legs felt like lead. She needed answers. Her past had just collided with her present, and nothing would ever be the same again. Outside the courtroom, she made a silent vow she would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost her. Tolu sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind was a storm of questions. If the victim was truly her brother, Kayode, where had he been for the past 20 years? Why hadn't he come back to her? And who was the man accused of killing him? Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her. It was her assistant. "Madam, are you okay? The recess is almost over." Tolu took a deep breath. "I'm fine. I'll be back shortly." But she wasn't fine. She couldn't step back into that courtroom without knowing more. She dialed the number of her private investigator, Doppo, a man she trusted with the deepest corners of her life. "Doppo, I need you to dig into this case for me. The victim's name is Kayode Adewale. I need everything: his background, his connections, and why his name has never come up in the past 2 decades. "Tolu, are you saying?" Doppo hesitated. "Yes," she interrupted. "He might be my brother." The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. A part of her still doubted it was true, but the photograph had been unmistakable. Doppo promised to get back to her quickly, and Tolu returned to the courtroom, her face carefully composed. But the moment she sat down, the prosecutor dropped another bombshell. "We call our next witness, Mr. Benjamin Adewale, the victim's father." Tolu's breath caught. She hadn't seen her father since she was a teenager, after he abandoned their family. Now, here he was, walking into the courtroom, his face weathered but recognizable. He avoided her gaze as he took the stand. "Mr. Adewale," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the victim?" Tolu leaned forward, her heart pounding. Her father's voice was steady, but there was something cold in his tone. "Kayode was my son," he said, "but he was no saint. He had enemies." The words sent a chill through Tolu. What secrets was her father hiding? Why was he distancing himself from Kayode, his own son? As the questioning continued, Tolu realized one thing: this trial was no longer just about her client. It was about uncovering the truth behind her brother's life and his death. Tolu couldn't focus. Her father's testimony echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. Kayode was no saint. He had enemies. What could that mean? Kayode had been a carefree, loving boy before he disappeared. What had changed? As soon as court adjourned for the day, Tolu rushed out, her thoughts a tangled mess. She didn't want to speak to her father, not yet. She needed answers first. Her phone buzzed. It was Doppo. "I've got something, Tolu," he said. His voice was grim. "You're not going to like it. Just tell me," she replied, gripping her phone tightly. "Kayode wasn't just your brother. He was also the head of a criminal syndicate operating in Lagos for years. He went by the name Shadow." Tolu froze. "That's impossible. Kayode was just a boy when he disappeared. He couldn't. I know it's hard to believe," Doppo said, "but I've got documents. Witness testimonies, even police records. It's all there. He disappeared as a boy, but he reappeared in the underworld a few years later. The authorities have been chasing him for over a decade." Tolu's knees buckled, and she sank into her chair. Her brother, a criminal. The brother she had cried for, searched for, and mourned? Doppo, who is the accused in this case. Why is he being charged with Kayode's murder? That's the strange part, Doppo said. The accused, Michael, is one of the boys Kayode took in years ago. He was like a son to Kayode. There's no motive for him to kill Kayode, at least, none that I've found. Tolu felt a surge of determination. If Kayode had truly been the head of a syndicate, then there were bigger players at work. She was certain now Michael was being framed. That night, Tolu sat in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the photograph of Kayode. She remembered his laughter, his warmth. She needed to know how her brother had gone from a boy full of life to a man consumed by darkness. Who had taken him away from her? Who had turned him into Shadow? As she pieced together the fragments of her brother's life, one thing became clear: the answers would cost her more than she was ready to give. But she had no choice. She had to keep digging, no matter where it led. The next morning, Tolu sat in her car outside her father's house, an old mansion in Ikuyi that reeked of wealth and secrets. She hadn't set foot there since she was 16, the day he abandoned their family for a new wife and a life of luxury. Now she was back, not as his daughter, but as a lawyer chasing the truth. The gateman hesitated before letting her in. "Madam, Oga doesn't like visitors," he muttered. "He'll see me," Tolu said firmly. Her father, Benjamin Adewale, opened the door himself, his face a mask of surprise and unease. "Tolu, what are you doing here? Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, stepping into the house uninvited. "Tell you what?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play games with me, Dad. Kayode, my brother, your son. You stood in that courtroom and acted like you barely knew him, like he was a stranger. Why?" Her father's face darkened. "Because the boy who left our house 20 years ago was not the same person who came back. Kayode chose his path, and it destroyed him. I had nothing to do with it. Don't lie to me," Tolu shouted. "You knew he was alive all these years. You knew he was Shadow. What happened to him? What did you do?" Benjamin sighed heavily, sinking into a leather chair. "Kayode came back to me 5 years after he disappeared. He was angry, vengeful. He blamed me for everything, for your mother's death, for the life we lost. He said he had found a new family, a brotherhood in the streets. He became Shadow, and there was nothing I could do to stop him." Tolu's voice shook. "You're lying. You could have helped him. You could have brought him back to us." "I tried," Benjamin shouted, his voice breaking. "But he didn't want to come back. He was consumed by his hatred for me. And now he's dead because of it." Tolu stared at her father, her heart pounding. His words held pain, but also guilt. He wasn't telling her everything. Before she could press further, her phone rang. It was Doppo. "Tolu," he said urgently, "I've found something big. Kayode was planning to leave the syndicate before he died. And it looks like someone in your father's circle didn't want that to happen." Tolu froze, her father's face a mask of quiet dread. The truth was closer than ever and more dangerous than she imagined. The courtroom was silent as Tolu delivered her closing argument, her voice steady and filled with resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I stand before you to tell you the truth. Michael is not the killer. Kayode did not die as we thought. His death was a liar ruse to escape a world that would have destroyed him." She paused, feeling the weight of the words she had just spoken. "Kayode Adewale was not just my brother, he was a man with knowledge. Knowledge that could have brought down powerful people. People who are in this room today. Kayode faked his death to survive. And those who killed him were the ones who didn't want the truth to come out. They thought they had silenced him, but they failed. His voice lives on in this courtroom today." Tolu turned to Michael, who sat in the defendant's chair, his face full of regret. Michael may have been part of the same criminal world, but he did not kill Kayode. He loved him like a brother, and he's been unjustly accused, because the real criminals are too powerful to be brought to justice. As Tolu spoke, the pieces fell into place. She had uncovered the conspiracy. Kayode's death was a cover-up, orchestrated by the same people who had made her father's life a living nightmare. Kayode had learned too much, and they wanted him silenced. But the truth couldn't be buried forever. The evidence, the witness testimonies, and the investigation all pointed back to the syndicate. The jury deliberated for a tense hour, and when they returned with their verdict, it was clear Michael was innocent of the murder charge. The relief in the courtroom was palpable, but for Tolu, the victory felt incomplete. She wasn't celebrating. There was still much to be done. Outside the courthouse, Tolu stood face to face with her father, Benjamin Adewale, who had been silent throughout the trial. He looked broken, haunted by the truth he had tried so hard to hide. "I was wrong, Tolu," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I should have protected him. I should have told you everything." Tolu's eyes were filled with both anger and sorrow. "You failed us, Dad. You failed him. And now we'll never get him back." Benjamin nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. "I know, but I want to help. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Tolu looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice cold but resolute. "It's too late for that. Kayode is gone because of your choices. But I'll make sure his fake death wasn't in vain. I'll fight for the truth." Weeks later, the truth finally came to light. With the help of Michael, Tolu uncovered the full extent of the corruption and the forces behind Kayode's disappearance. She exposed the criminals in her father's circle, and one by one, they were brought to justice. Tolu couldn't bring her brother back, but she could honor him by ensuring that his death wasn't a lost cause. She visited his grave one final time, the place where she had once mourned him, now filled with the peace of knowing the truth had been revealed. As she stood by the gravesite, she whispered, "I kept my promise, Kayode. Justice has been served." The world had been shaken by the revelations, but Tolu had found closure. She had uncovered the truth, held those responsible accountable, and honored her brother's memory. And for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The story of Kayode Adewale, the boy who became a man and who tried to escape the darkness, would be remembered. And Tolu had played her part in making sure his legacy was not forgotten.